Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Transcript. We're still here. We're still alive. The world didn't implode, thankfully. Hi. Thanks for joining me tonight. Hopefully, we'll have a few more scattered in between to show up. We are going to cover part 4, and I'm going to try and get through as much as possible tonight of Richard Allen. I currently join you covered in poison ivy here. So if you see, you can see it there and on my arms and my legs, and it's just great. I helped somebody take down a barn or a shed on Sunday, and there was a lot of stuff around it, and I was wearing shorts. So, yikes. Yeehaw. Anyways, I wanted to start tonight off with just a few, just some funny stuff. I think funny stuff, laughter is fun. And if you don't think so, I'm concerned for you. But I'm going to give you just a few of some of the funniest court cases of all time. So here's one where a young man named George had surgery to correct an ugly scar on his hand. The surgeon grafted skin from George's chest onto his hand, except George had a hairy chest. So now he had a hairy hand as well. George sued the surgeon and was awarded, quote, the difference in value between a 100% good hand and a hairy hand. And if you can tell me what that is with that math, great. After an extreme... Okay, so the opinion of Federal District Judge Payne in Noble v. Bradford Marine was a clear shout out to the hilarious film Wayne's World. It starts off with, after an extreme close-up review of the record and excellent authorities, the court enters the following order. The first section is captioned hurling chunks, the last a swing and a miss. In between, Judge Payne calls the defendant's case bogus and not worthy, and ultimately denies the defendant's motion with a curt "party on." So good. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining in. All right. TMI. Another man accused of speeding seemed really anxious as he stood before Judge Caprio. The judge said, "Is there something you want to say?" And the man says, "Actually, yes. My wife and I are trying to have a baby, and she's ovulating right now." What could be said beyond, "Thank you for sharing"? That's so funny. Just so funny. Another man stood before Judge Caprio defending himself for having parked in a handicapped spot despite not having a sticker or a visible handicap. The man claimed he'd meant to park for just a moment and go into the restaurant to bring his mother a glass of water. She was dehydrated, he explained. But when he was on his way out, he saw someone choking and felt obliged to administer the Heimlich maneuver. The only problem was when Judge Caprio asked him, "How does one do the Heimlich maneuver?" the man had no idea. Guilty as charged. In the only in Rhode Island category, Caprio tells Reader's Digest that everyone knows everyone in the tiny New England state, and sometimes it gets super awkward. For example, one time a guy came in for a hearing on a parking ticket. So far, so good, until his lawyer showed up. The lawyer, who was the husband of the defendant's ex-wife, was also the former governor of Rhode Island. Spoiler alert, it turned out the parking ticket was issued in error, so everyone went home happy. All right, last one. Judge Rosemary Aquilina had us in tears when she told us about an exotic dancer who, having pleaded guilty on a drug charge, was sentenced to wearing an ankle monitor. Just a few days after sentencing, however, the woman was back in the courtroom, seeking an exception because the ankle monitor was kind of, quote, ruining her vibe at the strip club. In response, the judge offered a veritable Solomon-esque solution. Bedazzle that thing to match your outfits. Motion denied. That one makes me chuckle. Oh my gosh, I love it. Oh man. So, we were talking about last week. We were talking about Brad Holder. I'm going to go back just a paragraph or two, just so we can kind of hop back into it. So let's continue on with this, shall we? As stated earlier, over 9 months, Rick's defense team still does not possess the electronically recorded interview of Brad Holder. Otherwise, it would attach a copy of that recording for the court to review. Presumably, this electronically recorded interview still sits in the Delphi police station, or possibly at the prosecutor's office, as the defense learned on September 11th that more discovery was ready to be picked up. Also, in this document, Holder told Special Agent Robert Pohl and Hammond Police Sergeant Christopher Goody, the following. He, Brad Holder, stated that his son Logan, 16 years old, was a friend of Abby. On Monday the 13th, Holder received a text from the Delphi Police Department asking him, Holder, to call back. What police departments send texts? Holder called the officer back and had a short conversation stating that he had never met the girls. I'm just saying, if like a police station sends you a text asking you to call them, can you like text back new phone who dis? The state police asked if they could examine Logan Holder's phone, and while they were collecting the phone, they informed Logan and Brad that the girls were deceased. Holder stated that he visited Delphi every weekend to hang out with his friend Patrick Westfall. Westfall lived in Delphi and was a friend of Holder in the Army. Holder and Westfall served in Afghanistan together. When Holder would go to Westfall's house, he would bring his son Logan. Logan and Westfall's son would generally go to Canal Park and play basketball. Holder believed that this is when Logan would contact Abby. Holder never actually met Abby himself, and he believed that Logan only actually met her one time as they attended different schools. Why, thank you. Thanks for the super duper chat. And yes, 1,000 subs is exciting. We celebrated with Terry's interview of Anthony Christopher on Monday. If you haven't seen that, it's about LaDonna. That is quite the story. Go check it out for sure. If you find yourself lost in this motion or in the case of Richard Allen, you can also check out like the last 3 night courts. We cover Richard Allen. One of them we cover in detail. Thanks, Lady in Gray. Holder knew Logan would communicate with her on the internet with his phone. Holder provided Westfall's phone number as XXX, XXX, XXX. You're missing one number there, my friend. He also stated that Westfall suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder and is on disability. Holder continued to state that he and Westfall started a tribe of Asatru followers. Asatru was described as a warrior religion popular with members of the military. Holder, Westfall, and Westfall's girlfriend, Rachel Miller, host Asatru meetings every Sunday at Westfall's house. Holder stated that there are only 5 to 6 regular members that attend. Holder was asked where he was on Monday. He stated that he was at work driving machinery at Waste Management in Buffalo, Indiana, until he clocked out sometime between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. After work, he went to the gym, workout anytime in Logansport. You know how I was tired last time when I was reading? I don't remember any of that. I'm assuming I read it, but I sure don't remember. That's what today calls for. Again, this very FBI report was later converted into a document that was reviewed by Tony Liggett. Upon reviewing this document, Tony Liggett concluded that that no leads required. In his August 8th, 2023 deposition, Tony Liggett explained the different phrases used concerning how law enforcement dealt with tips. In the deposition, Liggett could not remember the exact language used to describe the situation when there was nothing more that could be done with the tip, meaning the tip was at a dead end. Just like the tip. In the deposition, Liggett said that he believed the phrase used by law enforcement officers in reports to denote when, essentially, there was nothing left to do with the tip, i.e. a dead end, was, quote, no further leads. In his deposition, Liggett also differentiated between the meaning of no further leads and another phrase that might appear on reports, quote, fully covered. According to Liggett, no further leads meant that there was just nothing to this to start with. Fully covered means someone, i.e. law enforcement, did something with that and it was completed. When pressed as to what those two phrases meant in practical terms of whether there would be an expectation of future investigation related to the subject of the tip, Liggett said that both of those phrases meant that law enforcement had completed the work on the tip. In other words, the tip was dead. It is obvious between Liggett's deposition and the language Liggett used that he had concluded that there was no further investigation needed of Brad Holder at that time because, as he said in his deposition, there had been nothing there from the beginning and that needed investigating concerning Holder, meaning no more work to be done, no more investigation to be conducted concerning Brad Holder. Can I tell you how excited I am at the possibility that I might be getting a teleprompter? I'm so excited. I'll be able to, like, I don't know, pay attention to the camera, which is going to drastically improve everything. So, yay! Nothing to see here. Holder had an alibi. Please look at the next suspect. On March 5th, that's not a drink more. On March 1st, 2017, Liggett essentially gave up on investigating Brad Holder because of Holder's purported alibi. At the time that decision was made, it was known that Brad Holder was a proud Odinite who loved to post about the pagan religion of which he was a part. It was also known that he used sticks and tree branches to form patterns similar to those left behind at the crime scene. Exhibits 75 through 84 are just a few of the images on Holder's Facebook pages, mostly before Abby's and Libby's murder. Law enforcement also knew at that time Brad Holder was spending his weekends in Delphi with his friend Patrick Westfall. It was also known that Brad Holder's son, Logan, had some sort of dating relationship with Abby. This all seems like the type of information that would absolutely require an intense and continued investigation into Brad Holder and not a no further leads tag from Liggett. It would be crazy to think that at that early stage of the investigation, and with all that information that was already known by Liggett, that he would assign the designation of no further leads, ending the investigation of Brad Holder only 15 days after the girls were found brutally murdered at a very bizarre crime scene. Perhaps Liggett typing in no leads required was simply a typographical error, or a clerical error, or an unfortunate oversight. Perhaps it was a one-off circumstance. However, other reports demonstrate that Liggett did not commit a typographical error when he typed no leads required into the March 1st, 2017 report. It was intentional or reckless. For example, another tip had been supplied to law enforcement on March 9th, 2017 at 10:17 p.m. An unredacted copy of this report has been attached and marked as Exhibit 85 and has been filed confidentially. In this report, the tipsters told law enforcement that she had checked Brad Holder out and found him, quote, to be a dark and scary person through some of his postings on Facebook. You want to check him out. Again, this is another example of a citizen who knows nothing about the secretive crime scene, unlike law enforcement who knew that sticks and tree branches were placed on the girls. Yet, even without knowledge of the crime scene, this tipster, like many others, recognized that Brad Holder's Facebook page was dark and disturbing and required further inspection and investigation, especially knowing that Brad's son was dating Abby Williams. I'm going to read this footnote because it said like many others, and I want to know where they're getting that from. After Richard Allen was arrested, defense counsel even received a tip from as far away as Australia from a gentleman named Joe Lewis, who thought the defense should focus on Brad Holder based upon a review of Holder's public Facebook posts. Unified Command was based only a few miles from the murder site and thought Holder was not even a suspect. Yet a man 9,000 miles away was able to figure out the importance of focusing on Brad Holder. I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit more so it's a little easier to read for y'all. I think we might be able to get just a little bigger. Cool. Let's see here. Okay. As the tipster proclaimed to law enforcement about Brad Holder, you want to check him out. Except the problem was that Tony Liggett did not want to check Brad Holder out. Quite the opposite. After reviewing a particular tip sheet, as you can see at the end of the report, Liggett wrote, "No leads required, has been covered." Essentially, Liggett was saying, "Nothing to see here, please move on to a different suspect." In fact, as it relates to this tip, Liggett was doubling down on his concluding remarks by stating both that there was no leads required and that Brad Holder had been covered. There could be no doubt whatsoever that as of March 13th, 2017, when Liggett wrote down these words, that Liggett did not want Holder checked out any further as a suspect. That's insane. That's less than a month. Less than a month? That's a month to the day of the date they were killed. And he is already ruling out somebody, even though he's receiving multiple tips from as far away as Australia. That's ridiculous. Did Liggett's refusal to investigate influence other law enforcement officers to clear Brad Holder as a suspect? Yes. On March 14th, 2017, a month to the day that the girls were found, a tip came in identified as number. An unredacted version is attached and marked as Exhibit 86 and filed confidentially. The tipster in this let law enforcement know that he had reviewed Brad Holder's Facebook page and posts and felt that Brad Holder put off a bad vibe. This lead was evaluated by Kevin Hammond, who was a member of the Unified Command along with Liggett and Holman. Kevin Hammond wrote in his evaluation, "No leads required. Brad Holder has been cleared." Again, any even moderately curious human being would have looked at Brad Holder's Facebook page, compared images on Brad Holder's Facebook page to the crime scene, and then considered that Brad's son was dating Abby and that Brad was part of what appeared to be a religious cult and thought, "Wow, this is a guy we better investigate." Instead, Hammond found Liggett's lead. Followed Liggett's lead. In the system, Liggett had already cleared Holder, so that's exactly what Hammond did when entering his findings into the system. This is what we call groupthink. Now, two members of Unified Command, Tony Liggett and Kevin Hammond, had both disregarded the already mounting evidence that possibly pointed the finger at Brad Holder. Both Tony Liggett and Kevin Hammond had stopped the investigation into Brad Holder dead in its tracks by claiming that Brad Holder had been cleared as a suspect only 4 weeks after the girls were murdered. Ridiculous. Yeah. Yep. 100%. Elvis, Westfall, Holder, and his son. I think those four. No, they are not. I can't imagine. Did anyone other than local law enforcement clear Brad Holder as a suspect early on? Yes. On March 19th, 2017, at 11:23 a.m., another tip came in that believed Brad Holder sounded like the man on the famous audio released by law enforcement. An unredacted copy of this tip sheet is attached and marked as Exhibit 87 and filed confidentially. This time, it was FBI agent Michael Peasley, following the lead of Liggett, which indicated at the bottom of the report that Holder had been cleared. Why is the FBI following the lead? I don't understand. Although I bet you if they didn't, they would have been kicked off a lot sooner. On April 14th, 2017, another tip came in claiming that Brad Holder had changed his appearance following the girls' murders. This tipster further indicated that Holder even attended the girls' funeral and that although he typically did not wear glasses, he was wearing glasses at the funeral. This unredacted report is marked Exhibit 88 and filed confidentially. Although other tip sheet reports exist that tell a similar story, the defense offers up one last report related to Brad Holder. On August 14th, 2017, at 12:59 p.m., a woman contacted police. The report memorialized the tip as follows. Two women posted to a Facebook group that Brad Holder was responsible for the homicides. The tipster saw this post and told the police the contents of that post. The tipster went on to summarize what she reads. Quote, Holder is a pagan, murdered the girls as sacrifices, and left an F on the victims' bodies. Holder's son Logan is Abigail's ex-boyfriend. Emphasis added. Obviously, the F left at the crime scene was not left on the girls' bodies, but rather on a tree, painted using Libby's blood. However, how would this information concerning the letter F have even been known to anyone for anyone to talk about? A curious person might ask, could it be that someone who participated in the murders had talked about the crime scene with someone, who then talked to someone else, slightly mixing up the facts as the story passed from person to person? Law enforcement should have viewed this tip as something extraordinarily important because it was a tip that provided secretive information about the crime scene not known by the public. This information about an F being left at the scene was not only unavailable to the public, but there is no evidence that it was being discussed on the internet. This tipster could have been interviewed. The Facebook group members could have been interviewed. The state police or FBI tech people could have tracked down the people that posted this information to determine from where they received this F information. Continued investigation as to the source of the knowledge of the F discussed on the chat group could ultimately lead to someone who was at the crime scene and participated in the murders. That is what good law enforcement would do. Instead, what happened? As you can see on intake, any potential investigation stemming from this potentially game-changing information of someone's knowledge of the letter F being involved in the crime scene ended before it even began. The defense has marked an unredacted copy of this report as Exhibit 89 and filed it as confidential. The law enforcement officer that initially evaluated the tip must have understood the importance of mentioning the letter F because conduct follow-up was the request made. However, the next person in the chain, Roland Purdy, upon reviewing the tip, simply followed the previous lead of Liggett and Hammond. When it came to possibly further investigation of the tip generated, Roland Purdy, in a report identified as, quote, Invest Lead DIN 940, called Brad Holder fully covered, i.e., nothing further to do. Who were these people that somehow knew about the F at the crime scene, and how did they obtain that information? The world will never know, because Trooper Purdy followed Liggett's and Hammond's lead and buried that tip by claiming that Brad Holder had been cleared as a suspect. To conclude this section on evidence of Brad Holder's involvement, Richard Allen's defense team would tell the court that Liggett was aware of the many ways detailed in this memo in which Holder was tied to the Delphi murders. Yet despite this evidence linking Brad Holder to the crime, this is the dialogue between Liggett, who was answering defense counsel's questions at Liggett's August 8th, 2023 deposition concerning what Liggett claims his knowledge of Brad Holder was. Hello, Sammy Sunshine. Hello. Hello. I'm just going through some of the messages here. Hold on. Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing. I can't think of any human behavior or human logic that would justify the judge dismissing this and not allowing this other than to cover up for the police effing up. I truly can't think of that. I mean, that's fine, but did they read this? I mean, I am willing to withhold judgment, but I have yet to this moment in doing those recaps for Night Court have not experienced a shred of something that convinces me other than he said he did it while under duress in a prison in solitary for as long as he was. I think it was 13 months. I think. 18 months? It might have been 18 months. Which nobody with any kind of depression, anxiety, etc., like Richard Allen has, should have been in there longer than 30 days. 1 day is too long. And he's not even convicted yet, everybody. He's not even convicted. So it is a third party defense. You are correct. The Franks motion was a third party defense, and the judge swatted it down. She denied the motion to be able to include this into their defense, and so they had to go a different route. And considering that this was swatted down and they had to go a different route, I'm really hoping that we don't end up with a Menendez brothers, where because they can't hear this, the jury, it's like, well, who else would have done it? It's just it is incredible. Incredible. Or as somebody famous from Princess Bride said, inconceivable. All right, so here's the deposition. Okay, so Brad Holder then. So was there any other reason that Brad Holder was a suspect or at least a person of interest other than the fact that his son Logan dated Abby? I'm sure there was, but I don't recall without reviewing his information. Nothing stands out to you as you sit there about why Brad Holder might have been a suspect? No. Other than the connection with his son and Abby, is that right? Correct. You know, that's the thing is like people are not willing to dig in. They just accept what they hear. There's a theme this week. And they don't question it. You have to question this stuff. And if you end up being proven wrong, that's cool. That's great. That means you learned and you grew. But to shut down anything else or any thoughts or any research into solitary confinement, what he went through, his experiences, etc., is to deny the context surrounding the confessions. And to deny the context surrounding those confessions basically tells me that you don't believe in coerced confessions and you don't believe in false confessions at all. And that's not correct. So, just my 4 cents. Liggett was on the look, this motion's already got me done with one beer. Good thing I have a second one. Liggett was on the unified command. Liggett was heavily also thanks Nan for that. I appreciate that. Thank you. You gave me a soapbox. Liggett was on the unified command. Liggett was heavily involved in the investigation of the murders. To feign ignorance like that concerning the Brad Holder component of the investigation is astounding. Unified Command was fully aware of the Murphy-Ferenczi clique investigation, tying Johnny Messer and Elvis Fields to Brad Holder. In the deposition, Liggett had the opportunity to open up and say something like, Brad Holder was heavily investigated. There was even a thought that he was tied into some guys down in Rushville. If you don't have that evidence yet, let me get that to you. In the end, we didn't think it added up. Instead, Liggett took the bait and obviously tried to steer the defense away from the Brad Holder evidence, linking Holder to both the crime scene and to the Rushville crew. Oh, I think, yep, pretty sure that poison ivy's hit my eyes. See, this is what happens when you get it, you don't know that you have it, and you scratch. And then a very, very stressful 24 hours happen, and you go to bed and you scratch anyways. Oh, what a good time. What a great time to be alive. With Liggett's answer here, it is not surprising at all. 0. That Rick's defense where I lost my spot. Okay. Team did not receive important discovery concerning the Rushville investigation. Particularly Click's April 28th, 2023 certified letter to McClelland until September 8th, 2023. Again, McClelland, there are some spelling errors in here. McClelland only provided this discovery after Liggett and the prosecution realized that the defense was fully aware of the Rushville connections, and it was only a matter of time before we would learn of that non-discovered exculpatory evidence. Um, Liggett either intentionally or recklessly concealed the Odinite Brad Holder information from Judge Diener in his October 13th, 2022 affidavit for search warrant. Then Liggett and McClelland attempted to conceal exculpatory information from the defense. This motion is written so well, and it is so organized, and it is just the perfect example of the uphill climb the defense has to create a defense for their person. Um, I know. Tell me about it. Um, the defense is not supposed to. The burden of proof is not on the defense. It's on the prosecution. Like the defense shouldn't have to put this. It's blah, 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 blah. Had Judge Diener known of the concealed evidence, then Diener would not or should not have signed the warrant. And had the defense not dug in hard and found the needles in the haystack that led to its knowledge of Holder and Odinism, then the defense may never have thought to ask for the missing discovery. And McClelland would never have turned it over the click letter to the defense. Without the click letter to the defense, the defense would not have learned of other exculpatory evidence. Yeah, it was Sunday. I don't want to get it in my eyes. I prefer not to have it around my eyes, but they are burning, and I'm assuming that that's what it is. The facts show that Liggett acted intentionally and recklessly. Elvis Field's connections to the crime scene. The defense has previously discussed and presented the side-by-side photos that demonstrate that Elvis was mimicking Brad Holder by taking the time to recreate Holder's Facebook posts. Elvis would then post the recreated Facebook posts. What else did Ferenczi, Click, and Murphy unearth in their investigation that would connect Elvis to the crime scene? The Odin report provides much of that connective tissue. I'm now part of a gang and have a brother. On page 1 of the Odin report, Mary Jacobs told law enforcement that the February 14th, 2017 Elvis was rambling, hyper, and borderline incoherent. He was talking about having a brother, even though Elvis had no male siblings, and was now part of a gang. Elvis told Mary that he had been on a bridge with 2 girls that were killed. Elvis told her that someone named Abigail was a pain in the ass and a troublemaker. She said Elvis tried to give her, Mary Jacobs, a blue jacket. She told him that she had her own jacket. Oh, all those things have been washed. All of them have been washed. After Elvis made these statements to his sister, Mary Jacobs, she later became aware of the Delphi murders and put 2 and 2 together. Sometime 2 to 3 weeks after Elvis made the statements, Mary Jacobs and her husband Troy drove to Delphi. While in Delphi, Mary Jacobs talked to law enforcement about the things Elvis had told her February 14th, 2017. But, quote, due to the mass amount of tips that were generated, her information may have been overlooked. The defense has requested that the prosecutor locate the tip sheet that contains accurate details as to exactly what Mary Jacobs and her husband visited law enforcement officials in Delphi and what was communicated during this visit. Unfortunately, this is yet another piece of evidence that the defense has not received, probably because it's been shredded. If my spit is found on the girls, but I can't explain it away, would I still be in trouble? In December of 2018, Mary Jacobs enlisted the help of an old acquaintance of hers named Misty Moore. Since law enforcement had not followed up with Mary Jacobs from earlier in the year when she drove to Delphi and described what Elvis had told her, Mary was still concerned that Elvis was involved in the murders, but nothing was being done about it. Misty Moore worked for Homeland Security out of Greenfield, and Mary was hoping Misty could assist in locating someone from law enforcement to become interested in Elvis Fields. Mary talked to Misty Moore, who then passed this information on to the proper law enforcement channels. In January 2018, 2018, Mary was interviewed. Oh, you know I do. You know I see it, and I shall take it when I'm done. It's hard to read with an ice pack on your eyeballs. On February 1st, 2018, state police gave Mary Jacobs a polygraph to determine whether Mary was being truthful about what Elvis had told her almost a year earlier. Mary passed the polygraph. More on that later. Based upon what Mary Jacobs had told law enforcement in January of 2018, and based upon Mary Jacobs passing a polygraph in February of 2018, law enforcement interviewed Elvis on February 27th, 2018. This interview was videotaped, but the defense team just received this video on September 8th, 2023. 23. Jerry Holman, ooh boy, from Unified Command conducted this interview of Elvis. Kevin Murphy was also present. During this interview, Elvis agreed to take a mouth swab that would be used for DNA. Jerry Holman and Kevin Murphy, both the state police, explained the purpose of the mouth swab to Elvis, so Elvis was aware that the DNA from his mouth swab would be compared to any DNA from the crime scene. At the conclusion of the interview, Trooper Murphy dropped Elvis off at his trailer. As described on page 1 of the Odin report, after Elvis exited the police vehicle and walked towards his trailer, Elvis turned around before entering his house and walked back to Trooper Kevin Murphy's vehicle. When Elvis came near the squad car, Elvis posed, not like that, the question to Murphy. What would happen if Elvis's spit is found on one of the girls, but he has an explanation? Would he still be in trouble? Elvis then walked back to his trailer. Upon hearing that troubling but incriminating comment, Trooper Murphy immediately called Unified Command and communicated with Detective Jay Harper. On August 22nd, 2018, Elvis's other sister, Joyce Moffett, was interviewed by law enforcement officers Kevin Murphy and Greg Ferenczi. On 2 previous occasions, Joyce had denied that Elvis had made incriminating statements to her. However, in this 3rd interview, Joyce reluctantly recounted to Ferenczi and Murphy statements that Elvis had made to her in the fall of 2017. According to Joyce Moffett, sometime in the fall of 2017, Elvis Fields moved in with her following the death of her boyfriend. Joyce recounted the following statements Elvis made to her in the kitchen in October of 2017 at a time when they were living together under the same roof. I am in a lot of trouble. I am going away for a long time. I was on that trail and that bridge with those girls when they were murdered. There were 2 other people there with me when it happened. I spit on one of the girls after they were killed. Not only did Elvis make the incriminating statement about going away for a long time and being on the trail where the girls were murdered, but Elvis also confirmed to Joyce that he had indeed spit on one of the girls. Although Elvis reassured Murphy that he would be able to explain the spit, it is unknown at this point if Elvis has provided that explanation. Elvis lied to police, claiming he did not know Johnny Messer, even though Johnny Messer said he not only knew Elvis, but that Elvis was interested in joining Messer's and Brad Holder's Finlander crew. In his June 2018 interview, Elvis unequivocally denied knowing the recruiter, Johnny Messer. However, in his October 2018 interview, Johnny Messer tells a different story. In that October 23rd, 2018 interview, Johnny Messer states that Elvis lived with Johnny's Uncle Billy Messer. Johnny Messer further stated that in the interview that he would take in that interview that he would take firewood to his uncle's home during the winter that Elvis was living with Billy Messer. Most importantly, Johnny mentions that Elvis's boss and self-described father figure, Ned Smith, and Elvis's roommate, Rod Abrams, were all interested in joining Johnny Messer's Vinlander Club. Remember, Brad Holder was also affiliated with that club. However, Johnny Messer claims that the Vinlanders would not be interested in the likes of Elvis, Rod Abrams, and Ned Smith. The importance of Elvis lying to the police about knowing Johnny Messer cannot be understated. Elvis had to know that if he was connected to Johnny Messer, then he would eventually be connected to Brad Holder. It should again be noted that it is interesting that Ned Smith pursued an attorney for Elvis, and that Ned Smith wanted to sit on Elvis's October 2018 interview with police. In doing so, Ned was able to learn what type of questions were being asked of Elvis and provided Ned the ability to end the interview if Elvis started saying anything incriminating to Elvis, Ned, or Rod Abrams. This person who wanted to sit next to Elvis at the interview had previously paid for an attorney for Elvis is the same Ned Smith, according to Johnny Messer, that wanted to join Brad Holder's crew. Elvis's purported alibi. Rod Abrams lied about where he and Elvis were on February 13th, 2017, and Rod Abrams' false alibi conflicted with the alibi that Elvis provided to police. At his June 20th, 2018 interview, Elvis Fields told Ferenczi and Murphy that he remembered being at home in Rushville for 492 days earlier on February 13th, 2017. It is quite a remarkable feat for someone with Elvis's mental capacity to remember a specific day 492 days earlier. If you don't hear from me, just assume. Some people, like actress Mary Lou Henner, are blessed with something called autobiographical memory, which allows that person to remember specific days in their lives even years and years later. As previously noted by Murphy in his opinion, Elvis Fields had the mentality of a 7 or 8-year-old. Still, rather than admit that he had no idea where he was on February 13th, 2017, Elvis claimed he specifically remembers not leaving Rushville on February 13th, 2017. The Rod Abrams problem. No problem. Not on my list at the moment. On August 29th, 2018, Ferenczi and Murphy interviewed Rod Abrams. When asked where he and Elvis were on February 13th, Rod Abrams said that he, Elvis, and Ned Smith were in Muncie on that day visiting a sick friend at a hospital. Autobiographical memory must be in the water in Rushville, as Rod Abrams, when interviewed, was able to remember exactly where he was 562 days earlier. I like the little jab. In addition to remembering that they were at the hospital in Muncie, Rod also stated that both he and Elvis had their phones with them. When told that law enforcement would check cell phone records to see if Rod was actually at the hospital in Muncie, Rod explained that, quote, hospitals cut cell reception on phones because they interfere with hospital equipment. Not anymore. Not anymore, buddy. So their phones probably would not show that they were at a hospital in Muncie. In fact, a lot of hospitals have Wi-Fi now. In supplement number 542, Joyce Moffat interview provided in Discovery, handwritten notes, presumably of law enforcement, state the following. Fields, Ned Smith, Rod Abrams, not in Muncie, 2/13/2017, at hospital. This was the conclusion of law enforcement, and obviously Rod Abrams' ridiculous statement that their phone records would not confirm that their phones were at the hospital because of hospital equipment is common sense evidence that Rod Abrams was lying as well. On February 13th, 2017, phone records apparently show that Elvis's phone stayed in the same place in Rushville from approximately 10:30 a.m. until approximately 7:30 p.m. Phone records also show that Elvis, for some reason, did not use his phone whatsoever for roughly 9 hours. Elvis told law enforcement that he usually kept his phone on him. As stated in the previous paragraph, Rod Abrams stated that Elvis had taken his phone to Muncie to visit the mystery friend at the hospital. However, phone records show that Elvis's phone was in Rushville during that time frame. Somebody was hanging out with people that he wanted to hang out with, and he said, "Who else would call me?" and left it. The phone problem is twofold. One, Elvis's phone remaining at his home for roughly 9 straight hours conflicts with Rod Abrams' professed alibi for Elvis, Ned Smith, and Rod Abrams. Two, in today's day and age, it would seem highly unlikely that Elvis simply did not pick up his phone for roughly 9 hours, especially when Elvis claimed that he usually kept his phone with him. The takeaway for any curious investigator would also be, at a minimum, twofold. One, Rod Abrams lied about being in Muncie, but Elvis forgot to stick with that lie. Two, Elvis went up to Delphi, but was told to leave his phone behind so that phone data would not show that he was in Delphi. It is unknown if Rod Abrams or Ned Smith's phone records were ever recovered. Suffice it to say, Elvis's and Rod Abrams' alibis are beyond highly suspicious. I agree with that conclusion. Perhaps the most damaging piece of evidence that links Elvis to the crime scene was found in an unusual place: the middle of a report that memorialized the results of Mary Jacobs' polygraph examination. In Mary's pre examination interview, polygraph examiner Stephanie Thompson recorded that Mary Jacobs stated the following: Elvis told her Abigail is a little troublemaker, that he placed leaves on her and used sticks to give her horns. Horns and antlers are common symbols used in pagan rituals, and Brad Holder himself displayed the Odinite fascination fascination with horns on his Facebook posts. Find attached Exhibit 97 from Brad Holder's Facebook page. As you can see, the middle photograph is an image of a person with small stick-like antlers on the top of their head. Find attached a close-up photograph of Abby's head from the crime scene. From a distance, it may not be immediately noticeable. However, upon closer inspection, it is obvious that someone involved in the killings intentionally placed small sticks from a tree on top of Abby's hair to resemble horns or antlers. The horns formed from sticks on Abby's head look similar to the image found on Holder's Facebook page. The defense has not viewed one single report that discusses the sticks placed atop Abby's hair, shaped like horns, antlers, being compared with Elvis's statement to his sister that he shaped sticks into horns on Abby. Therefore, the presumption is that Unified Command never figured this out. Trooper Purdy was present at the polygraph examination but was not able to watch the examination and therefore would not know about Elvis's words to his sister Mary about using sticks to form horns on Abby. Rather than now being curious in the year 2023 as to how Elvis knew such a thing, and then using this new information as a basis to secure a search warrant or even an arrest warrant on Elvis when factoring in all of the other evidence, sadly, it is expected that law enforcement will do the exact opposite of being curious. It is expected that law enforcement will claim that the photograph does not prove anything or that the defense is exaggerating the photograph. Perhaps Unified Command will huddle together and establish the go-to party line stance on how to deal with the problems created with the polygraph examination information and photo of sticks formed as horns on Abby's head in the crime scene photographs. It would be refreshing if someone in Unified Command could stop worrying about how the public will view their incompetence, admit to mistakes, and then perform the type of police work that should have been performed 6 years ago. The defense is not holding its breath. As the defense told Holman in his deposition, the unfortunate expectation is that Holman and Liggett will try to figure out how to solve that problem rather than to solve the case of who murdered those girls. Elvis's insider knowledge of the crime scene may be a place for Holman to start. Again, part of the Franks analysis involves the court reviewing the behavior of law enforcement to determine whether Liggett intentionally concealed and falsified evidence in Liggett's affidavit for search warrant. Liggett and Holman and the rest of the Unified Command's reaction to the information contained in the polygraph examination concerning sticks formed into horns on Abby's head may very well reveal whether Liggett is interested in the truth or in burying the truth, which again is part of the Franks analysis. Much of what connects Patrick Westphal to the crime scene has been discussed in the section detailing what connected Brad Holder to the crime scene. To shorten this section, the defense will numerically lay out both the evidence previously discussed as well as a few other pieces of evidence that tie Westphal to the crime scene. 1. Brad Holder and Patrick Westphal were friends at least until late January 21st, 2017, as proven by Facebook photos, a Facebook photo previously attached. However, according to Amber Holder and law enforcement monitoring Facebook posts between Holder and Westphal, a fight between them occurred sometime in February 2017 concerning a ritual gone bad in the woods near a creek. Okay. In the Odin report, Brad Holder told Amber Holder that the person that murdered the girls was Patrick Westphal and his crew. Furthermore, as referenced in the Odin report, Brad Holder told Amber Holder that Patrick Westphal is dangerous and has powerful friends that will protect him, and that she needs to back off or he will not be able to protect her. Brad Holder told law enforcement that Patrick Westphal has post-traumatic stress disorder. The video or the ritual in Fort Wayne that Forensics sent to Liggett, and which has been attached as an exhibit, shows Brad Holder videotaping someone that looks like Patrick Westfall using his fingers to mark a tree in the ceremony at about the same height that the F tree was marked with Libby's blood, leaving the question of whether Patrick Westfall marked the F tree in the same way that he marked the tree in the Fort Wayne ceremony video. Patrick Westfall lives within a 7-minute drive of where the girls were murdered. Johnny Messer and Brad Holder commonly hung out at the Manon High Bridge and in the woods around the Manon High Bridge. Patrick Westfall also admitted that he knew the woods around the Manon Trail very well. A Patrick Westfall Facebook post from just 2 months before the girls are murdered shows Westfall cutting tree limbs into runes by slicing the tree limb with an electric saw, creating clean, smooth edges to the tree limb. In that Facebook post, Brad Holder is commenting, "Cutting runes." At the crime scene, one of the tree limbs placed on Abby has its end sliced cleanly and smoothly, similarly to the way Patrick Westfall is slicing the tree limbs in Exhibit 98. Why, thank you very much for all of those things, all three. The Holy Triumvirate. Yeah, that. Westfall's alibi for February 13th, 2017 is that on the day of the abduction, he was at home with his son, Nick. There is no evidence that law enforcement knocked on doors to determine if Patrick Westfall was at home at the time, nor any evidence that law enforcement walked around the neighborhood to see if any ring door cameras or any other type of cameras caught Patrick Westfall leaving the house. Law enforcement just believed Patrick Westfall. Patrick Westfall was a pastor for a religion known as a Asatru, quote, which is a warrior type of religion with many gods, including Odin and Thor. Patrick Westfall and Brad Holder were both affiliated with Vinlanders Club or gang along with Johnny Messer. On March 2nd, 2017, only 16 days after the girls were found murdered, Unified Command member Kevin Hammond indicated that there was no lead required concerning Patrick Westfall, meaning no further need to investigate Patrick Westfall. This is insane. This is gross negligence. Gross negligence on law enforcement's part. And I think that because they effed this one up, they decided we got to find somebody. So let's find somebody. Hope they don't figure this out and just put them in jail. Which, congratulations. Congratulations to you guys. Congratulations to the law enforcement up there. You did it. You put him in there for 18 months in solitary. A man who's not convicted, who was sent to state prison, I believe, not instead of a local county jail, because you thought it was dangerous for him. There's nothing better than torturing somebody under the guise of it's safer. Look, you made me take off my glasses. Patrick Westfall is connected to the crime scene in multiple ways. It is unknown if Brad Holder threw Patrick Westfall under the bus to Amber Holder in order to take the stink off of himself, Brad, or if Brad knows that Westfall murdered those girls and then marked the tree like he did in the Fort Wayne ceremony. Either way, it cannot be understated that one single solitary softball interview between law enforcement and Patrick Westfall is disgraceful, considering everything listed above that links Westfall to the crimes. Let's repeat that. I feel like I'm being talked to, like I'm in trouble. Let's repeat that. It appears that Westfall was interviewed one time on February 19th, 2017. 2 weeks later, Westfall's eliminated as a suspect. The defense is unaware of any search warrants requested on Patrick Westfall to determine whether this Asatru pastor had taken clothes of Libby or of Abby or Libby as ceremonial keepsakes, or even if he had saved Abby's blood. By looking at the 5-paragraph report generated from the only interview of Patrick Westphal, it looks like law enforcement did nothing but lob giant softballs at him rather than conduct an intense interrogation the way citizens would expect for someone that the evidence shows is so closely connected to the crimes. Yes, he did. He had, I think he had anxiety, depression, things like that. He was taking, I think, Prozac beforehand. And yes, it is gross for sure. Yes. Um, I'd be talking to myself too and answering. I would want, I would do anything to get out of there. I would do anything to get out of there. As has previously been discussed, Johnny Messer was close with Brad Holder and Patrick Westphal and also knew Elvis Fields, Ned Smith, and Rod Abrams. Furthermore, as previously discussed, Johnny Messer was a recruiter for Vinlander. Also, as previously stated, Ned Smith, Rod Abrams, and Elvis Fields all hoped to join the Vinlander Club, according to Johnny Messer. Around Valentine's 2017, Johnny Messer went, quote, up there to Delphi to hang out with his Vinlander buddies. As stated earlier, Patrick Westphal claimed to be at his home in Delphi on February 13th, and Brad Holder claimed to be in Logansport on February 13th. Therefore, if Johnny Messer was going up there to visit his Vinlander buddies, he was going to Delphi to spend time with Westphal, who is like Messer's brother, or possibly to Logansport to visit Holder. When Messer came back from being in Delphi around Valentine's Day, the vehicle he drove to Delphi had blood along the side of the vehicle, and Messer, had no explanation for the blood's existence. Taylor Hornaday had to go to the car wash multiple times to clean off the vehicle. Evidence shows that the recruiter, Johnny Messer, was the connective tissue between the Delphi crew and the Rushville crew. Unified Command overlooked these connections, and furthermore, Liggett failed to inform Judge Diener of these connections to the murder scene. Rod Abrams told police a lie about his whereabouts on February 13th. This was discussed and referenced in Elvis's section, as was the fact that Elvis's alibi conflicted with Rod Abrams' alibi. Here are a few other evidentiary nuggets picked up from the defense's review of Rod Abrams, February 27th, 2018. Interview that the prosecution just provided to the defense on September 8th, 2023. Some of these evidentiary nuggets from Rod Abrams' videotaped interview incriminate Elvis Fields. Elvis had been working for Ned Smith since 2005, but then stopped working for Ned Smith in 2017, the same year as the murders. According to Rod Abrams, Elvis was communicating with a 12-year-old girl on the internet and discussing inappropriate things. Elvis used Facebook to communicate to young girls aged 13, 14, and 15. When law enforcement asked Rod, quote, has he ever talked about doing anything to a couple of girls? There's a long pause. Then Rod Abrams finally said no. The law enforcement officer said, are you sure? Rod responded, he's never, he has, the law enforcement officer then says, you kind of hesitated when I asked you that. When Rod Abrams is asked if Ned Smith and Elvis will also say that they all were in Muncie on February 13th, Rod Abrams doesn't answer the question, but after a long pause tells a long rambling story about how Ned doesn't always remember things. Finally, law enforcement asks Rod if they can look at Rod's phone to see any texts between Rod and Elvis. He refuses, claiming that Elvis no longer has his phone number after Rod changed phones. According to Johnny Messer, Rod Abrams, along with Elvis and Ned Smith, were all interested in joining Messer's and Holder's Vinlander Club. The lies about Elvis's alibi should have been especially alarming to Unified Command. However, the items enumerated above all should cause Unified Command to pause about Rod Abrams and Elvis Fields' involvement in the murders. Conclusion of Part 2. Part 2 was dense with information. However, the court should be able to see that Tony Liggett knew about the obvious connection between Odinism and the murders, and specifically the connection to Brad Holder, Patrick Westphal, Johnny Messer, Elvis Fields, and Rod Abrams based upon the evidence provided to the court. The fact that a mystery Purdue professor purportedly led the Unified Command off the scent of Odinites is preposterous. Additionally, according to Todd Click's affidavit, the FBI cold case unit determined that Odinites were involved in the murders, but Unified Command did nothing to investigate the Odinites. Unified Command seemingly rebuffed the Rushville investigators, who believed, based upon a large collection of evidence, that Holder, Westfall, Fields, Messer, and Abrams were all involved. Liggett's concealment of this Odinite information from Judge Diener was intentional or reckless or both. Part 3. Liggett concealed and falsified evidence in his affidavit for search warrant. For Liggett's timeline to work and to place Richard Allen on the Manon High Bridge at 2:13, the time of the famous Down the Hill video, Liggett desperately needed Betsy Blair to describe a man on the Manon High Bridge that looked like Richard Allen, and perhaps more importantly, needed Betsy Blair to describe a car that she observed parked at the CPS parking lot at approximately 2:15 p.m. as looking like Richard Allen's black Ford Focus. Betsy Blair's description of the man she observed on the Manon High Bridge around 2 p.m. looked nothing like Richard Allen. Liggett concealed this information from Judge Diener. Betsy Blair's description of the vehicle she observed at CPS parking looked nothing like a black Ford Focus. Liggett also concealed this information from Judge Diener. For good measure, Liggett also lied about what Sarah Carbaugh observed at 3:57 p.m. that also blew up his timeline. Betsy Blair's first description of the man she saw on the bridge was memorialized in sketch number 2, illustrated on February 17th, 2017, 3 days after they were found, but not released to the public until April 22nd, 2019, following Superintendent Doug Carter's press conference. On February, you'd think if a murderer was loose, don't you think you'd want to circulate that? On February 17th, 2017, Betsy Blair met with state police sketch artist Taylor D. He sounds like a morning host on a radio. It's Taylor D in the morning. Bryant provided a description of the man she observed from 50 feet away on the Manon High Bridge. The same man that Liggett claimed in his affidavit was the killer. Betsy Blair told the sketch artist that the man she observed was, 1, a white male, age 20, had brown curly hair, medium build. Find attached and marked as Exhibit 103 the unredacted facial identification reference sheet filed as confidential that contains the description that Betsy Blair provided to the sketch artist. Also, find attached a copy of the sketch that Taylor D. Bryant produced from Betsy Blair's description of the man she observed on the bridge, marked as Exhibit 104. This illustration is also called sketch number 2 because it was released to the public second. Upon looking at the sketch, Betsy Blair told the sketch artist that the illustration was a 10 out of 10 for accuracy. The Unified Command did not release the Betsy Blair sketch to the public for over 2 years. Instead, they first released the Sarah Carbaugh sketch, also called sketch number 1 because it was released first. The Sarah Carbaugh sketch was illustrated by FBI sketch artist Plants from Detroit on June 19th, 2017, and released to the public on July 17th, 2017. Who was the person that Sarah Carbaugh was describing in her sketch? According to Liggett's affidavit, at approximately 3:57 p.m., Sarah Carbaugh observed a man walking westbound on County Road 300 North. Sarah Carbaugh was headed eastbound on County Road 300 North, operating her motor vehicle while simultaneously observing this man walking on the road toward her on the opposite side of the road. This is the same man that Sarah Carbaugh described for the sketch artist on June 19th. We will be discussing Sarah Carbaugh's description of that man later. Roughly 2 years later, in March of 2019, Betsy Blair met with Tony Liggett, frustrated that her sketch had not been released to the public. Betsy was frustrated because sketch number 1, which had been released to the public almost 2 years before, did not match the man that she observed on the High Bridge. Betsy even commented that sketch number 1 was wrong. Certainly, it was odd that the Sarah Carbaugh sketch was chosen to be released over the Betsy Blair sketch for the following reasons. Betsy Blair provided her description to the sketch artist only 4 days after seeing the man on the bridge while it was fresh in her mind, compared with Sarah Carbaugh, who provided her description to the sketch artist 126 days after she observed the man on the road. Betsy Blair had a good look at the man's face while stationary from only 50 feet away. Sarah Carbaugh was not stationary, but rather traveling down the road, operating operating her vehicle while simultaneously trying to observe the man on the road. And let's remember, they had no idea, she had no idea what this guy did or what would be accused of doing. So was she really paying attention? During her March 7th, 2017 interview, Betsy Blair was talking with two members of Unified Command, Kevin Hammond and Tony Liggett. Ah, the destructive duo. At this interview, Betsy Blair told Liggett face to face that the man she observed on the high bridge fit the following description: slender and youthful looking, more boyish looking, in his 20s to early 30s. His hair seemed poofy just as the sketch portrayed. He had no facial hair that she could remember. Finally, on April 22nd, 2019, Unified Command released Betsy Blair's sketch number 2 to the general public. In fact, upon its release, Superintendent Doug Carter commented that the man in Blair's sketch number 2 was responsible for the murders. Also, at the time of the release of sketch number 2, Doug Carter also stated that sketch number 1 had now become secondary to the investigation. On March 7th, 2019, Liggett was present when Betsy Blair described the man she observed on the bridge. Betsy was actually talking to Liggett face to face when she provided the description. Liggett heard Betsy's description of a much younger man with brown poofy hair, but chose to conceal this information from Judge Diener. Blair's description of a youthful, boyish-looking person in his 20s, maybe early 30s, with brown poofy hair obviously does not at all describe Richard Allen. In order for Liggett to have provided Judge Diener with honest and accurate information, he would have had to state the following in his affidavit, and they've written it out for him. I, Tony Liggett, believe that Richard Allen is the man that murdered the girls for reasons stated herein. I also believe that the man that Betsy Blair observed on the bridge is Richard Allen, and therefore the killer. However, I must also inform the court that the man that Betsy Blair observed on the bridge really looks nothing like Richard Allen. Whereas Richard Allen was a man in his mid-40s with short or even shaved grayish hair, the man that Betsy Blair described was youthful, boyish looking, and had brown poofy hair. Also, Your Honor, Betsy Blair told the sketch artist that the man she saw on the bridge was just 20 years old. This description came only 4 days after she observed the man on the bridge. 2 years later, Betsy Blair maintains that the man was in his 20s or maybe early 30s. Also, Betsy Blair told the sketch artist back in 2017 that the resemblance of the boy's sketch to the man that she observed on the bridge was a 10 out of 10. I must also tell you, Judge, that this 10 out of 10 sketch looks absolutely nothing like Richard Allen. Liggett had a legal obligation to inform Judge Diener of the vast differences between Betsy Blair's description of the man she observed on the bridge and Richard Allen. He did not. The fact alone should be sufficient to merit tossing the warrant and suppressing the fruits of an illegal search. However, there is more. In order for Liggett's timeline to work, he needs Richard Allen's black Ford Focus to be parked at the CPS lot from 1:30 to 4:30 p.m. Betsy Blair sees one car at the CPS lot at 2:15 p.m., and it is not Richard Allen's car. Richard Allen voluntarily was interviewed on October 13th, 2022. Watching the videotaped interview, it's apparent that Richard thought he was being asked questions to help assist the police in solving the crime. In trying to provide Liggett and Mullen a timeline of when he was at the trail, Richard stated he arrived at the trail around noon. Later in the interview, Richard Allen told Liggett and Mullen that he probably left the trail around 1:30. In his affidavit, Liggett states that Richard Allen parked his black Ford Focus at the CPS parking lot and then cut over to the trail, where he then walked to the high bridge, ultimately following Abby and Libby across the bridge, before abducting them. After murdering the girls, Liggett stated in his affidavit that Betsy Carbaugh observed a man that Liggett claims is Richard Allen walking along 300 North at approximately 3:57 p.m. westbound toward the CPS parking lot. The implication being that Richard Allen was walking back to his car after abducting and murdering the girls. If what Liggett wrote in his affidavit were true, then Richard Allen's black Ford Focus would have been parked in the CPS lot from 1:30 p.m. until at least 4 p.m., giving him time to abduct the girls, murder the girls, and walk back to his black Ford Focus parked at the CPS parking lot sometime after 3:57 p.m. when Sarah Carbaugh observed Richard walking down 300 North. In other words, for Liggett's timeline to work, Richard Allen's black Ford Focus would have had to remain parked at the old CPS building from roughly 1:30 p.m. when Liggett claims Richard Allen arrived until roughly 4 p.m. after, as Liggett claims, Richard Allen had abducted and murdered the girls. If Richard's black Focus was not on the CPS parking lot between those hours, then Liggett's timeline would be blown. In his deposition, Liggett was asked a series of questions by defense counsel, and Liggett answered those questions as follows. Is it your contention that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was parked at the old CPS building at 1:29 roughly p.m. on February 13th, 2017? Yes. Is it your contention that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was parked at the old CPS building at 1:45 p.m. on February 13th? Yes. Is it your contention that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was parked at the old CPS building at 2 p.m. on February 13th? Yes. Is your contention that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was parked at the old CPS building at 2:14 p.m. on February 13th? Yes. Is it your contention that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was parked at the old CPS building at 2:15 p.m. on February 13th? Yes. Is it your contention that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was parked at the old CPS building at 2:30 p.m. on February 13th? Yes. And we're going through all of this 15 minutes at a time. What time do you contend that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was no longer parked at the old CPS building? Around 4. Through his answers, Liggett demonstrated that he recognized that for his timeline to work, Richard Allen's black Ford Focus would have to be parked at CPS from 1:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. in order to give Richard the time to abduct and murder the girls and return to his vehicle. Therefore, if there was any evidence that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was not parked in the old CPS parking lot between those times, that is something that he would be required to share with Judge Diener. Rather than tell the truth, Liggett concealed the evidence that Richard's black Ford Focus had left the CPS parking lot, probably at 1:30 p.m., but certainly before 2:15, when Blair saw a completely different car. And therefore, Richard Allen could not have been on the bridge at 2 p.m. or committed the murder soon thereafter. For starters, as noted earlier, in his interview with Liggett and Mullen, Richard Allen stated that he arrived at the trails around noon and left around 1:30. Liggett failed to inform Judge Diener that Richard Allen stated he had left the trails at 1:30. He should have, especially if there were evidence that a different vehicle was parked at the old CPS lot after 1:30 p.m. but before 4 p.m., which would then support Richard Allen's statement that he left the CPS building around 1:30 p.m. So the next question to ask is, did anyone see a vehicle parked at the CPS building between 1:30 and 4 p.m. that did not resemble Richard Allen's black Ford Focus, thus supporting the timeline that Richard Allen provided to Liggett, but which Liggett concealed from Judge Diener? The answer is yes, Betsy Blair. When Betsy Blair arrived at the trail at roughly 1:46 p.m., Betsy Blair had parked her vehicle in a different location that the defense calls the Mears parking lot. When she left the Manon trail and pulled out of the Mears parking lot, Betsy Blair headed west on 300 North in her car and was spotted on the Hoosier Harvest Store camera heading toward the old CPS lot at 2:14 p.m. The old CPS lot is only a 36-second drive from the Hoosier Harvest Store camera. Giving Betsy Blair a full minute to drive from Hoosier Harvest Store to the old CPS lot would mean that Betsy Blair would pass the old CPS lot at around 2:15 p.m. Remember that Liggett has admitted under oath that at 2:15 p.m., Richard Allen's black Ford Focus would be parked at the CPS building while he was abducting and murdering the girls. What a leap. However, at 2:15 p.m. when Betsy Blair passed the old CPS building, Betsy Blair did not see a black Ford Focus parked at the old CPS lot. The car that Betsy Blair observed as she passed the old CPS building at 2:15 p.m. looked nothing like a black Ford Focus. According to Liggett's own report, Betsy Blair observed one car parked in the CPS lot at 2:15, and that car resembled a 1965 Ford Comet that her father once owned. The shape had sharper angles. Again, to whom did Betsy Blair provide this description of a 65 Ford Comet looking, angular in appearance vehicle? None other than Liggett himself. Liggett was fully aware that the car that Betsy Blair described as being backed into a spot at the old CPS building looked nothing like Richard Allen's black Ford Focus, but Liggett concealed that information from Judge Diener. It should also be noted that if Richard Allen left at 1:30 p.m., then the person that Betsy Blair observed on the high bridge at roughly 2 p.m. was not Richard Allen. This would explain why the person that Betsy Blair observed on the high bridge looked nothing like Richard Allen, because it wasn't Richard Allen. It was a 20-year-old kid with brown poofy hair. Concealing Betsy Blair's description of the vehicle at the old CPS building from Judge Diener may have temporarily plugged a hole in the dam of Liggett's problematic timeline when Diener reviewed the affidavit on October 13th, 2022. But Liggett's concealment had now been exposed. And it gets even worse. When asked to describe the color of the car that resembles a 1965 Ford Comet, Betsy Blair actually told Liggett that the car she saw was not black. That's right. Liggett heard from the mouth of Betsy Blair that the 1965 Ford Comet-looking vehicle was not even black, which is the color that Liggett needed the vehicle to be in order to fit the description of Richard's black Ford Focus as described in Liggett's affidavit. Because of Betsy's description of the car she viewed at the old CPS building, evidence supports that Richard Allen left at 1:30 p.m., as he told Liggett. At some point in time after Richard left the old CPS lot, an older, angular-looking car that resembled a 1965 Comet and was not black arrived at the old CPS building. Then the driver of this 1965 Ford Comet-looking, angular, non-black vehicle backed into the CPS parking lot. At roughly 2:15 p.m. when returning home, Betsy Blair observed this car that reminded her of a car her dad had growing up. All of this adds up to this fact. Evidence concealed by Liggett supports that Richard Allen was not at the crime scene, as he had already left at 1:30 p.m. and was already home by the time that Betsy Blair observed the 1965 Ford Comet-looking non-black vehicle at the CPS parking lot. And Liggett knew it. Again, because of Betsy Blair's description of the vehicle she observed at the old CPS building, evidence supports that Richard Allen was also home by the time that Betsy Blair saw the 20-year-old with brown poofy hair on the bridge, which, again, explains why the person on the bridge looks nothing like Richard Allen, because it wasn't. This is simply outrageous and abusive behavior on the part of Liggett. Abusive in that Liggett used his power as a law enforcement officer to conceal evidence to secure a search warrant 26 days before an election in which he was running for sheriff. At the brunt end of Liggett's abusive behavior is Richard Allen, who has been sitting and suffering in hell for over 10 months. Liggett doesn't even have the excuse that Betsy Blair provided the description to a different detective, and therefore he could not have known of Blair's distinguishing description, making it a simple administrative snafu that fell through the cracks. No, Liggett heard the description straight from the mouth of Betsy Blair, yet chose to conceal this timeline-destroying evidence from Judge Diener. If Judge Diener had known that evidence showed that Richard Allen was home by the time that the girls were abducted at 2:13 p.m., my entire system just folded and freaked me out. I was like, what just happened? Diener would never have signed the search warrant. But that's not all. It gets even worse. Liggett flat out lied when he told Judge Diener that in 2017, Sarah Carbaugh described a man as wearing muddy and bloody clothing and was also wearing a blue jacket. For Liggett's timeline to work, not only did Liggett, need for Richard Allen's black Ford Focus to be parked at the old CPS lot between 1:30 p.m. and 4 p.m., but he also needed Sarah Carbaugh's statement concerning the man she claims she saw walking westbound on 300 North at 3:57 to match Betsy Blair's description of a man wearing a blue jacket. It would also help if the man had blood on his clothing to further tie him into the murder. In his affidavit, Liggett wrote the following. An interview was done of Sarah Carbaugh in 2017. Somebody get me the little blue pill for this mic. She states that she was traveling east on 300 North and observed a male subject walking west on the north side of 300 North away from Manon High Bridge. She stated that he was wearing a blue-colored jacket and blue jeans and was muddy and bloody. She further stated that it appeared that he had gotten in a fight. Investigators determined from the video that she was on 300 North at 15:57 hours. The blue jacket described by Sarah Carbaugh would need to match the color of the jacket described by Betsy Blair to help with Liggett's timeline. Again, the blood on the clothing would be an added bonus in that it would tie the man that Sarah Carbaugh observed in with the murders and therefore assist Judge Diener in making the decision to sign the warrant. The problem is that in 2017, Sarah Carbaugh told Liggett to his face the man she observed walking west on 300 North was wearing a tan-colored coat, a lighter colored coat, not a blue jacket. This is a problem because the color of the man's coat did not match the coat of the 20-year-old boyish-looking man with the poofy brown hair that Betsy Blair observed in the High Bridge around 2 p.m. According to Liggett, both of these men were Richard Allen. Another way to put that is that Liggett has asserted that sketch 1 and 2 are the exact same man, Richard Allen. Carbaugh saw a man walking on 300 North wearing a jacket. Liggett needed the color of that jacket to match the color of the jacket worn by the man Betsy Blair had observed on the High Bridge at 2 p.m. because Liggett is claiming that both men are the same. The problem was that Carbaugh did not observe the man walking down 300 North wearing a blue jacket. She observed a tan jacket. This meant that Sarah Carbaugh and Betsy Blair observed two different men. This created a problem for Liggett's timeline. So instead of being honest, Liggett chose to represent to Judge Diener that Carbaugh observed a man wearing a blue jacket when in her 2017 interview, Carbaugh said it was tan. But that's not all. Nowhere in Sarah Carbaugh's 2017 interview does Sarah Carbaugh use the word bloody to describe the clothing that the man was wearing. Nowhere. The so-called muddy, bloody lady is actually just the muddy lady, as Carbaugh only used the word muddy to describe the man she observed on 300 North in her 2017 interview. It certainly would help Judge Diener in making his decision if the man walking down the street was wearing a blue jacket and was also wearing a bloody clothing as if he had just murdered somebody. However, Liggett just flat out lied. Sarah Carbaugh never mentioned a blue coat, never mentioned blood in her 2017 interview. Instead of lying, had Liggett told Judge Diener that the man walking down 300 North at 3:57 p.m. was wearing a light-colored tan suit instead of a blue coat, then Judge Diener would have realized that Betsy Blair and Sarah Carbaugh did not see the same man. Instead of lying, had Liggett told Judge Diener that the man walking down 300 North only had on muddy clothing, then Judge Diener would not have associated that man with murder. Again, Liggett can't claim that when drafting the affidavit. Liggett relied on the false description provided by a different investigator. No, Sarah Carbaugh told Liggett to his face that the man she observed was wearing a tan coat and was only muddy, not bloody. If Judge Diener had been told the truth, he would not have, nor should he have, signed the search warrant. There is a reason that in a sworn affidavit, Liggett concealed key information from Judge Diener and lied about other key information. Had Diener known the hidden and falsified facts, then Diener would never have signed the search warrant, a search warrant that was already insufficient in linking Richard Allen to the murders even before Liggett's lies and deceptions. Liggett's concealed and falsified evidence would have told a completely different story had Liggett not concealed evidence and lied about evidence. Richard Allen told Liggett to his face that he had left the old CPS parking lot by 1:30 p.m., but Liggett opted to not let Judge Diener know about what Richard said. When Richard Allen drove away from the old CPS parking lot at 1:30 p.m. to go home, at some point in time before 2:15, a person driving a car that resembled a 1965 Comet, angular in shape and not black, backed their car into the old CPS parking lot and parked. Then at 2:15 p.m., Betsy Blair drove past the old CPS parking lot and observed the car and remembered what it looked like because it reminded her of her youth, a car that her dad drove in the 60s. Because Richard Allen had left the CPS parking lot at or before 1:30 p.m., it certainly explains why the man that Betsy Blair observed at the High Bridge at 2 p.m. was a boyish and youthful-looking 20 to 30-year-old man with poofy brown hair that looked nothing like Richard Allen because it wasn't Richard Allen, as Richard Allen had left for home a half hour earlier. There is a reason that the man Sarah Carbaugh observed on 300 North at 357 was not wearing a blue coat like the man Betsy Blair observed on the High Bridge. It's because the man that Sarah Carbaugh observed on 300 North at 3:57 p.m. wasn't the same man that Betsy Blair saw on the bridge at 2 p.m. It was a completely different man that had mud, not blood, on his clothing. Betsy Blair saw one man, perhaps the same man that Voorhees, Bree Wilbur, and Anna Spath saw on the trail. Sarah Carbaugh observed a completely different man. And while all these witnesses were observing two different men, Richard Allen was at home where he had been since leaving the Manon Trail on or before 1:30 p.m. That is the difference the concealed and falsified evidence would have made for Judge Diener. Right. Part 4, Odinites in Westville. After his arrest, Richard Allen was forced to be housed in Westville Correctional Facility based upon a safekeeping order. On April 3rd, 2023, two of the transport guards walking Richard to and from his visit prominently displayed multiple patches on their Department of Corrections uniform. The top patch, "In Odin We Trust," was displayed under their embroidered name tags on the right side of their Department of Corrections uniform shirt. On the left side of their DOC uniform shirts were two patches. The lower of the two patches consisted of a partial American flag and interlocking triangles. The interlocking triangles is a common symbol for those involved in the pagan Odinite religion. Above this American flag interlocking triangle patch was a patch that proclaimed, "I hate people." Below are images of those patches, in spite of the fact that for over 5 months, Richard Allen's defense team had been able to bring in their phones when visiting Richard Allen after Richard's defense team showed photographs of a decrepit Richard Allen at Westville. Warden Gallipo apparently issued an order that Richard's defense team were no longer allowed to bring in their phones. Because Richard's defense team were no longer able to bring in their phones, the defense team was not able to take photographs or video of these patches after April 3rd. Therefore, the defense is providing affidavits from members of Richard Allen's defense team that viewed these patches on multiple occasions after April 3rd, 2023. Here are the patches worn by the guards. The images below of the patches worn by Sergeant Robinson and Jones were found on Etsy. These patches can be purchased off Etsy. Fun. Ridiculous. The first time that Richard's defense team noticed Sergeant Jones and Sergeant Robinson in the patches that they wore in their DOC uniform was April 3rd, 2023. This also coincides with the time frame that Richard Allen's mental health began a steep decline. From that point forward, these two guards seemed inseparable from Richard Allen. Odinite correction officers Robinson and Jones would walk Richard Allen to and from his attorney's visits, as well as on one occasion when Richard visited with his wife, always wearing these embroidered patches. For a period, Sergeant Robinson and Sergeant Jones were also videotaping Richard Allen and his interactions with his attorneys. This ended only upon complaint by Richard's attorneys after several visits. Additionally, Sergeant Robinson and Sergeant Jones were always close enough to Richard to be assured that Richard did not feel comfortable talking to his attorneys or his wife without knowing that these Odinite guards were within earshot of anything he would tell his lawyers or wife. Whoops. What did I do? I think I reloaded it. Well, that's not good. Sorry. I lost it. There we go. All right. Wes Baker and Matt Hoffman have both been a part of Richard Allen's defense team since December 2022 and have met with Richard on several occasions. Paragraph 10 of Max Baker's affidavit provides insight into some of what was going on at Westville with Odinist guards Jones and Robinson. Strap in. During one memorable visit on May 4th, 2023, myself, Attorney Baldwin, and Attorney Rosie met with Richard Allen to discuss matters involving the case. At this time, Richard Allen was in a mental and physical state of deterioration and was nearly non-communicative. During the visit, Richard Allen repeatedly asked whether or not his wife was okay and if his family was okay. He claimed on a couple of occasions that they were going to kill him. When asked who he was referring to as they, Richard Allen responded by saying the guys with the Odin patches. Up to this point in the legal process, Richard Allen's defense team had never mentioned Odinites or Odinism to Richard Allen, either directly or indirectly. The first time I'm aware of any mention of Odinite involvement to Richard Allen was during a visit on August 25th, 2023, when Kathy Allen attended, and a discussion occurred between attorney and client regarding ties to the crime scene. At an August 10th, 2023 deposition, the defense finally revealed to Jerry Holman, one of the main investigators on this case, that the defense knew that the evidence exposed the high likelihood that Odinites committed these murders by laying out the evidence right in front of Holman. Up until that time, the defense had strategically played dumb about possessing any knowledge of the Odinite movement. This strategy was in place for many reasons. However, the defense finally revealed its knowledge to Jerry Holman on August 10th, 2023. 1 week later, during their first attorney visit since that August 10th, 23 deposition, Sergeant Robinson, as usual, dropped Rick off at the attorney meeting. Sergeant Jones was absent on this visit. However, something else was also different on this visit. Notably missing from Sergeant Robinson's uniform were the Odinite patches that Richard's defense team had taken note of on every attorney visit ever since April 3rd. Perhaps not so coincidentally, after Jerry Holman became aware of the defense team's knowledge of the Odinite involvement in the murders, magically those patches were removed from Robinson's uniform, leaving blank spots where the patches used to be displayed on the very next attorney visit. The defense would remind the court that also, perhaps not so coincidentally, Tony Liggett was the only person that refused to support the transport of Richard Allen out of Westville when other options, Cass County, were available. Liggett cited as his sole reason for rejecting Richard Allen being moved from Westville, 76 miles away, to Cass County, Logansport, is that he would have difficulty transporting Richard Allen to Delphi from Logansport for hearings and trial, a distance of less than 20 miles. Certainly, state police were available to assist in transport if Carroll County could not. Yet Liggett refused to agree to the transport, leaving Richard Allen in Westville guarded by Odinites. When factoring everything contained in this memorandum, Liggett's objection to moving Richard Allen to Cass County over transportation concerns is troubling, especially when the patches were moved after the depots. Also found contemporaneously with the Franks motion and memorandum is the defense's emergency request to transport Richard Allen out of Westville to the Cass County jail, despite Tony Liggett's objection to the same, as the defense has legitimate concerns of Richard's safety once this motion and memorandum are filed. Beyond Sergeant Jones and Sergeant Robinson wearing in Odin We Trust patches, what else links them to Odinism? Sergeant Jones and Robinson's relationship with Odinism went beyond the patches that they each proudly displayed while transporting Richard Allen to and from his attorney visits. On his Facebook page, Sergeant Robinson does not hide his devotion to Odinism. On June 25th, 2023, Robinson posted a photo of what the defense would call an altar featuring horns, antlers, and Thor's hammer, and a dish sitting atop some type of animal fur, with various runes decorating the outer edges of the dish. All these items were placed on what appears to be a circular wooden platter. It appears that Sergeant Jones liked Sergeant Robinson's Odin altar post. Sergeant Robinson altar to Odin is similar to an altar to Odin posted by Brad Holder. As stated by Max Baker in his affidavit, Sergeant Robinson was involved in transporting Richard Allen to most, if not all, his attorney visits. Sergeant Robinson always wore his Odin patches. However, that changed following Coleman's contentious August 10th, 2023 deposition. In that deposition, which has been attached and provided to the court as an exhibit, about 2/3 of the way through, Holman begins getting called out by the defense for Unified Command's incompetent handling of the Odin aspect of the investigation. It was also at that point in the deposition that the defense began asking critical questions concerning the way that Unified Command handled the investigation of Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Johnny Messer, and Elvis Fields. You will note that nowhere in that deposition did the defense reveal to Holman that the defense was aware that Sergeant Robinson and Jones were wearing the In Odin We Trust patches. Attorney Rosie and defense team member Max Baker visited Richard Allen On August 17th, 2023, only 7 days after the contentious deposition with Holman, in which it became obvious that the defense was fully aware of the strong evidence that Odinis committed the murders. At this August 17th, 2017 visitation, as Max Baker states in his affidavit, Sergeant Robinson no longer was wearing the patch. The defense team has no direct knowledge as to why Jerry Holman or anyone from Unified Command contacted Sergeant Robinson or anyone else from Westville to alert them that the Rick's defense team was fully aware that evidence supporting Odinis being involved in the murders. However, it is certainly a curiosity that deserves attention and consideration. As Max Baker also describes in his affidavit, Sergeant Robinson was always within a few feet of Richard Allen during Richard's meetings with his wife, Kathy. The 2 visits that Richard had with his wife were without the hustle and bustle and noise of other inmates during their visitation. While Warden Gallipo may claim that Westville was doing Richard a favor by allowing him privacy with his wife, the defense views it differently. With no other inmates in the room was completely quiet. Sergeant Robinson could hear everything that Richard told his wife. Certainly, Robinson and Jones stood close enough to Richard to intimidate Richard from talking openly and honestly to his wife about what was going on in Westville. Additionally, in their combined 50-plus years of practicing criminal defense, attorneys Baldwin and Rosie have never had their purported confidential attorney visits videotaped with a handheld recorder. Sergeant Jones and Sergeant Robinson, beginning April 3rd, 2023, began videotaping Richard Allen's interactions with his attorneys. Particularly outrageous was the fact that Richard Allen was required to face the camcorder from about 10 feet away through a glass. This means that Richard's mouth was being videotaped. This means that Richard was not able to talk freely to his attorneys and say things like, "They are stating that if I don't tell my wife that I am guilty, then they are going to harm my wife." If Richard were to say anything like that, it would be on video. Remember, Richard Allen continuously asked his defense team if his wife was okay and if his family was okay. The defense has obtained video from the prison. One of the videos that we obtained showed an aftermath of something that happened to Richard Allen. Find attached a full still shot of Richard Allen taken from a window that Westville produced. The defense does not have the exact date, but the video indicates that the video was taken between May 26th and May 30th. The still shot is attached to this memorandum and filed as Exhibit 121. The defense is not sure exactly what happened to Richard Allen that caused him to look the way happened to Richard Allen that caused him to look the way depicted in the still shot. Whether it was self-harm or something else, the fact that Richard is being watched by Odinites and the evidence strongly supports Odinite involvement in the murders causes great concern for the defense in terms of Rick's safety. Additionally, in Matt Hoffman's affidavit, you will find that the last hearing on June 15th, 2023, Rick was constantly pleading with the guards not to shock him. "Please don't shock me. Please don't shock me. Please don't shock me." Matt Hoffman indicated that Rick made the comment in front of multiple guards and in front of multiple members of Rick's defense team. Sergeant Jones' Facebook post reveals his ties to Odinism. Find attached an image taken from Sergeant Jones' Facebook page marked as Exhibit 122. As you can see, the interlocking triangles that appear on Sergeant Jones' patch are also appear in this photo. You will also notice a rune in the lower left-hand corner of the photo. It is hard to see because it's in black. Also remember that Sergeant Jones liked Sergeant Robinson's altar to Odin. The defense would request the court to review Max Baker's affidavit to learn of Sergeant Jones' involvement in guarding Richard Allen. It is nearly identical to Sergeant Robinson's involvement. They don't teach you in law school what to do when your client, who is accused of murder, is being guarded by members of a religious cult whose members evidence strongly supports were the actual murderers. Yep, that is where we are. At some point in time, coincidences cease to be coincidences. The fact that Liggett did not want Richard Allen to be removed from Westville purportedly over transportation issues is curious. The fact that Odinites are guarding Richard is very concerning, or at the very least curious considering the evidence discussed in the memorandum. The fact that Sergeant Robinson stopped wearing his "In Odin We Trust" patches within days of Jerry Holman and the Unified Command learning that the defense was fully aware of the evidence linking Odinists to the crime scene, and that the Unified Command had avoided investigating Odinists is curious. Again, the court must determine whether Liggett acted intentionally or recklessly when he omitted or lied about information when he drafted the affidavit for search warrant. The defense would ask the court to consider that Liggett objecting to Richard Allen's transfer to Cass County over transportation issues is evidence of intentionality in that Liggett wanted Allen to remain in Westville, guarded by Sergeant Robinson and Jones and any other Odinite that the defense of whom the defense has not learned works at Westville. All right, almost done. Tony Liggett has testified under oath that there is no DNA linking Richard Allen to the crime scene. Liggett further has testified that he's unaware of anything that links Richard to the crime through his phone, computers, or electronics. Liggett has further testified that he is unaware of any evidence that links Richard Allen to any weird religious cult group. Jerry Holman has testified to the following. There is no DNA linking Richard Allen to the crime scene. No data extracted from Richard Allen's phone connects him to the murders. No data extracted from Libby's phone connected Richard to the murders. There is no evidence that Richard Allen is or was connected to any suspects in the case. There is no evidence found on social media that connects Richard Allen to the murders. There is no evidence extracted from Richard Allen's computers that connects him to the murders. There is no fingerprint evidence that connects Richard Allen to the murders. This section is very short because there is simply no evidence linking Richard Allen to the murders. However, in his affidavit for search warrant, Liggett attempted to drum up as much connectivity as he could muster between Richard Allen and the murders to convince Judge Diener that it was more likely than not that evidence of the murders would be found in Richard Allen's house and vehicles. Here, essentially, is what Liggett swore and affirmed linked Richard Allen to the crime. Richard was on the trail sometime between 1:30 and 3:30. Richard owns a blue coat. Richard owns guns. Richard owns knives. Liggett's claim, while withholding key evidence, that a black Ford Focus was parked at the CPS building between 1:30 and 4 p.m. Liggett's claim, while withholding key evidence, that Betsy Blair observed a man on a bridge and Liggett claimed was Richard Allen. Liggett's claim, while withholding key evidence, that Sarah Carbaugh observed a man walking down the road that Liggett claims, one, was Richard Allen, and also, two, the same man that Betsy Blair viewed on the high bridge. That's it. That's all. With all the evidence linking Brad Holder, Patrick Westphal, Elvis Fields, Johnny Messer, and Rod Abrams to the murders, as discussed in Part 2, Liggett did not seek a single search warrant for any of those high-level suspects. None. However, 26 days before the election, Liggett made a choice to seek a search warrant for Richard Allen's house based upon the items 1 through 7 above. Let's run through these one by one. Richard Allen was on the trails between 1:30 and 3:30. The single solitary source for this information is Dan Doolin from the Department of Natural Resources. Therefore, in order to confidently trust that Richard Allen actually said that he was on the trail between 1:30 and 3:30, Dan Doolin's work product would also have to be trusted. Words matter when talking to someone. For example, if the exchange between Dan Doolin and Richard Allen was this: Richard, we think the girls were abducted between 1:30 and 3:30. Were you on the trail at any point in time between 1:30 and 3:30 on February 17th? And Richard Allen answered yes. That does not mean that Richard Allen was actually on the trail the entire time between 1:30 and 3:30. However, Doolin could memorialize that exchange as Richard claimed he was on the trail the entire 2-hour time span. If so, Doolin's report would be inaccurate. Therefore, Doolin's accuracy in writing reports may need to be considered and scrutinized. The defense does not have to go very far in scrutinizing Doolin's accuracy in report writing. It can start with the report Doolin wrote about his interaction with Richard Allen. The conversation between Richard Allen and Dan Doolin came about when Richard Allen called the tip line to provide the limited information that he may have found, that he may have had from his time on the trail that day. Doolin and Richard met at a grocery store in Delphi. At the conclusion of Doolin's interview with Richard Allen, Doolin, prepared his report. However, Dublin screwed up the most basic of tasks, getting the name right. Doolin was so sloppy in drafting this report that he put Richard Allen's name into the system as Rick Allen Whiteman. Before being forced to sell their house, and move away from the community that they loved because of the horrific allegations that Rick brutally murdered 2 young girls, Richard Rick Allen and his wife, Kathy, lived for many years on Whiteman Drive. This is probably the source of Doolin's mistake. Find Exhibit 123, the unclassified report, which shows DNR officer Dan Doolin identifying Richard Allen as Rick Allen Whiteman in the system. Well, since we can't necessarily trust DNR Dan's DNR accuracy in writing reports, at least there would be a tape recording that would be able to provide the precise words used by Richard Allen, right? Wrong. Find attached Exhibit 124, which is a report provided to the defense in discovery from DNR Dan concerning his interview of Richard Allen. In this report, DNR Dan wrote the following: I checked my audio recordings and cannot find one for him. I will keep looking because I am sure I recorded every interaction I had related to my assigned leads. Of course, another source of information of what time Richard Allen was on the trails that day is Richard Allen himself. As discussed previously in this memorandum, Richard Allen told Liggett that he arrived on the trails around noon and left around 1:30 p.m. This was information that Liggett concealed from Judge Diener. Richard's black Ford Focus was not parked at the CPS building at 2:15, according to Betsy Blair. This was also information that Liggett concealed from Judge Diener. Liggett also failed to inform Judge Diener that DNR Dan cannot be trusted to perform the most basic of tasks when conducting an investigation. Get the name right. Liggett swearing under oath that Richard Allen was on the trails between 1:30 and 3:30 based upon Dan Doolin's lost and unrecorded interview may not be the best benchmark for Judge Diener to rely on. Unfortunately, Judge Diener would not know the unreliability of Doolin's report because Liggett never let him know. 2. Richard Allen owns a blue coat, as do millions of other men. Richard owns guns, as do millions of other men. Richard owns knives, as do millions of other men. His black Ford Focus was parked at CPS building between 1:30 and 4 p.m. As the court knows by now, at 2:15 p.m., Betsy Blair observed a vehicle parked at the old CPS lot that resembled a 1965 non-black Comet with an angular design. This was not Richard Allen's vehicle. More importantly, Tony Liggett concealed this fact from Judge Diener. 6. Betsy Blair observed a man on a bridge that Liggett claimed was Richard Allen. As the court knows by now, the man that Betsy Blair observed on the bridge was a 20-year-old kid with brown, poofy hair that did not resemble Rick Allen. This is not surprising considering that Rick Allen left the Manon Trail at 1:30 and therefore was not on the high bridge when Betsy Blair observed the 20-year-old kid. Rick's black Ford Focus was not on the CPS lot at 2:15, which is further evidence that Rick Allen was not on that bridge, as he had already left the trails. Again, Liggett concealed that Betsy Blair identified a young man on the bridge and not Rick Allen. 7. Sarah Carbaugh observed a man walking down the road that Liggett claims one was Richard Allen and also 2, the same man that Betsy Blair viewed on the high bridge. As the court knows by now, Sarah Carbaugh observed a man wearing a tan coat and muddy pants. This man does not meet the description of the man that Betsy Blair observed on the bridge, which according to Liggett is the same man that Carbaugh observed on 300 North. And because Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was not at the CPS lot at 2:15 when Betsy Blair passed by and saw a 1965 Comet-looking car at the CPS lot, Richard Allen could not have been the man walking down 300 North. Liggett lied to Judge Diener when he claimed that in 2017, Sarah Carbaugh observed a man with a blue coat and muddy and bloody clothing. Richard Allen is not connected to these horrific murders in any way. Liggett attempted to convince Judge Diener that evidence of the murders would be found in Rick's home over 5 years after the girls were slain based upon the 7 enumerated reasons identified above. If Liggett had been honest, then Judge Diener would not have signed the warrant. Liggett wasn't honest, though. Richard's lack of any connection whatsoever to the crime scene, combined with Liggett's lies and concealments, merit a Frank's hearing. To prevail on its request for the court to set matter for the Franks hearing, the defense must make a substantial preliminary showing that omitted or false statements were made knowingly or intentionally with reckless disregard. If the trial court concludes that omitted facts or false statements were necessary for finding of probable cause, the trial court should set a hearing on the defendant's request. Franks v. Delaware, etc., etc. Indiana's Girth Court actually provided a simple way to assess whether a Franks hearing is justified. Is the concealed and false information contained in the brief the type of information that any reasonable person would have known? Was the kind of thing a judge would wish to know? The defense provided a very, very long and detailed analysis of the facts because the court must determine whether evidence exists that Liggett acted intentionally or that Liggett acted with reckless disregard. The defense believes that the very long and detailed analysis of the facts was necessary to provide a very strong foundation from which this court could conclude that Liggett acted intentionally or with reckless disregard. Or more simply put, the very detailed analysis of the facts shows the course to conclude that yes, the omitted information and false information identified in the memorandum is the type of information that Judge Diener would have wanted to know before signing the warrant. Wherefore, Richard Allen, by and through his attorneys, Andrew J. Baldwin and Bradley A. Rosie, request that this court set this case for a Franks hearing, at which time the defense will be asking for the search warrant to be deemed illegal and the fruits of the illegal warrant to be suppressed. Wow. What? What a time. What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. It's insane. Thank you all. We made it. 136 pages and 4 episodes. We made it. We did it. Yes. What are we doing next week? No idea. But I'm sure we have something planned, something to add. So we'll see. We will see. We got Hey Ho Show on Friday. It's a special episode of the Hey Ho Show on Friday at 9. I think Women on Death Row is releasing at 7 on Friday. On Sunday, we start all over again with Night Court at 8. So, woohoo! Share with your friends. Thank you so much to all of you who have tuned in. Thank you so much to those who have subscribed. I really, really appreciate you. We've hit that 1,000 sub mark. Soon we'll be looking to boost the memberships, but for now, we're just happy that you're here with us, and we'll always just be happy that you're here with us. So thank you so very much. And like I typically end every single night with you all, please take care of yourself. And I always mean it, but I mean it for real. This like for real. There's more in it tonight. Take care of yourself. Take care of your friends. Take care of your family. Take care of that community. Reach out to people who you know might be hurting or sad or worried or scared or afraid, and let them know that you're there for them. Please. Do not let anybody dull your sparkle. And shine on. Shine on, you crazy diamonds. I will see you all on Friday. Good night.